Hello, I am Michael Hussey, Interim Dean at Widener Law Commonwealth. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the third session of our annual Emergency Medical Service Program. At the law school, we have a First Responders Initiative to support our first responder law students. The initiative aims to provide each of them with the academic, career, and financial support that each needs to become a successful attorney. We are grateful to the law firm of Page, Wolfberg, and Wirth LLC for sponsoring a generous scholarship to support our first responder students. Thank you to Professor Christian Johnson, alumnus Doug Wolfberg, Corinna Wilson, Joy Boudreau, Brian Fernbaugh, Paula Hyder, and PCN, as well as everyone else involved for all of their hard work in planning and coordinating this program. I hope you find today's session informative. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Dean Hussey, and good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Wolfberg, and I will be the moderator for today's panel. It's been my privilege to serve as the moderator for the entire series of this year's program, and we do very much appreciate the efforts of Widener Law Commonwealth in hosting this program again for the second year. We hope this becomes an annual event, and this really symbolizes the university's commitment to EMS, to first responders, veterans, their outreach and programming for those populations and those constituencies is outstanding, as I can speak to personally. So, and I do want to thank Widener Commonwealth Law for that ongoing support. And I also want to echo Dean Hussey's thanks to all the individuals who helped to make this program happen, and all of the panelists who have been dedicating their time to making this program so successful and so worthy. And we'd also like to thank all of you who have tuned in and participated and asked your questions throughout the weeks of this program. And looking at the attendees on Zoom, I know many of you personally. It's great to see you at least virtually, and hope next year we can see you all in person. Feel free to keep your webcams on during the program if you would like. Please keep your microphones on mute. And if you have any questions throughout the course of the program, you may ask those on the Zoom chat feature. I'll be monitoring those questions throughout the course of the panel today, and we'll then address those questions on the air. If you would like your question to be addressed to a particular panelist, please note that in your question. Otherwise, I will refer it generally to one or more of the panel members. We have a great panel today that we're very excited about and very appreciative of them spending their time, and I will introduce the panel here momentarily. This is, again, the third in the series of these programs. The first was on October 16th, where we had a Pennsylvania legislative leadership panel with chairs of the House and Senate committees that oversee EMS. On last Friday, October 23rd, we had the local government panel, and today we have the law and policy panel. And again, all of these sessions have been recorded. They are available online, and we do thank PCN, who will be broadcasting these sessions as well. The format for today will be similar to the format we've used for the last two sessions, and that is that I will introduce each panelist one at a time. They will make introductory presentations and give overviews of the EMS landscape and public safety landscape from their vantage point and their perspective, primarily as it relates to the legal issues that are going on within the industry in Pennsylvania. Then we will have some time for some open Q&A and some dialogue with our panelists. So that is the plan of attack for today. So without any further delay, I am going to introduce our first panelist, who is Rick O'Leary. Rick is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania House Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee, a position he has held for the past 26 years. You don't even look that old, Rick, which means he's really been at the forefront of just about every piece of legislation that's affected our industry that has come down the pike within the last several decades. From that vantage point, he is certainly one of the key key players. Also too modest to include in his introduction that he is a former Marine who has served our country. So, sir, we thank you for your service, and we thank you for joining us today. And the floor is yours. Oh, please remember to unmute your mic, and then the floor is yours.
Got it. Thank you. Well, I first want to thank you for inviting me here to participate in this year's program. It was a great event last year, and I look forward to this panel today. It's a shame we can't all meet in person, but things are what they are, right? I think we can all agree that funding and recruitment and retention of our EMS personnel are probably the two key issues that need constant upkeep, or the system will sink into deeper crisis than it's already in. In regard to these two issues, we have been busy in the last several weeks of legislative session. Some of you are aware of our inclusion of about 10 SR6 bills into House Bill 1673 last week. And I'm happy to announce that the governor did sign that bill and another bill, which I will reference shortly. He signed them yesterday. That was great news. A lot of effort on everybody's part. We thank everybody for, it was a good team effort. In regard to 1673, which again was an omnibus bill of many bills put into it, we didn't have a lot of time left in this session, so we lumped them all in. It was like a 56-page bill in the end. Some of the EMS highlights were we increased the loan amounts for the Volunteer Loan Assistance Program, and we also allowed, as we do for fire departments, we allowed for ambulance departments the interest rate to be 1% instead of 2% for EMS companies that merge. We also reauthorized the annual Fire and EMS Department Grant Program, and now we allow departments to use the grants for COVID-19 revenue losses for 2 years. And as well, we allow the grant to be used for recruitment and retention programs. The bill also authorizes counties and school districts to offer tax credits to fire and EMS responders, as current law already allows for local governments to do. That was about 3 years ago. That's been a pretty successful program. In tandem with this bill, we also passed House Bill 1836, sponsored by Representative Cowser. Again, the governor yesterday signed this bill. This bill increases the MSOF moving violation fines from $10 to $20. As well, the DUI, the ARD fine was increased from $25 to $50. As well, this new law requires that 30% of the MSOF fund is to be used for training in underserved rural areas, and no less than 10% of the fund is to be used for equipment grants. You know, funding is indeed, it's a top priority for EMS. We are aware of that. You know, we've increased the MA rate several times, but we got to do better. We got to get those increases up, and that's something we constantly work on. You know, as well, we passed the Treat No Transport legislation. Representative Berardo, who's my chairman, I know 2 weeks ago, talked about that bill with you, so I won't go over that one again. But we're also working on Representative Masser's House Bill 1347, which would require insurers to direct pay ambulance services. That's a big bill. Again, we're kind of out of runway for this session, but we hope to pick up where we left off early next session. We also passed into law House Bill 1459, which creates peer-to-peer review and mental wellness and stress management programs for emergency responders across the state. These changes in the law, which focus on funding and recruitment and retention, but you know, they need to be built upon, and that's all part of the SR6 process as well. And we look forward to continue working with all you folks. As this seminar, you know, focuses on public policy, you know, that's kind of that's our world here. It can't be stated enough that it is the stakeholders who are at the center of developing good public policy. I know my chairman, you know, we always get the stakeholders together when we do things, because if the people you're trying to help aren't involved, then you're probably doing something wrong. We have an excellent working relationship with the Ambulance Association of Pennsylvania, the Fire and Emergency Services Institute, the Pennsylvania Emergency Health Services Council, as well as the Bureau of EMS, as well as countless individual EMS providers who give up their personal time to advocate for your industry. As you know, there are entities that are sometimes on the other side of your issues, you know, such as the insurance lobby, the healthcare networks, and other organizations. And your statewide organizations do a tremendous job educating the House and Senate members on your issues, but their work is sometimes countered by opposition groups. Thus I can't emphasize enough how important it is for each ambulance service to form a personal relationship with all their elected officials at all levels to ensure that they fully understand your operation and the needs of the citizens. Because if they are not hearing and seeing it directly from the ambulance service in their own district, they can be swayed by others, to believe that the problem does not affect their area or it's non-existent. I hear a lot, oh, it's a Philly issue, it's a Southeast issue, it doesn't affect my folks. And it's very important that you get to them ahead of time to let them know this does affect us, and we're watching your vote. Your individual ambulance companies you're a very effective lobby to affect change in EMS policy around the state. And so, give your elected officials a ride along, invite them to your training exercises, attend borough or township public safety committee meetings, or just get them around a table, to discuss what's on your minds. In my capacity as the executive director for the House Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee, my chairman has always directed me to schedule the committee to participate in as many events across the state as possible. And I know that it's a very effective tool to make sure that we have 25 committee members from all walks of life all around the state. Some of them do have fire EMS background, but not all of them. And when we get together for these training exercises or forums, whatnot, it's a great educational tool to get them up to speed on the issues that we as an oversight committee need to address throughout the session. That's pretty much it. I just kind of want to just put a few things out there. I don't want to take up too much time. I look forward to the question and answer period, and I look forward to hearing the other panels. So thank you, Doug, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate the overview. Appreciate your participation. Please stand by and we will get into some Q&A, excuse me, and some discussion after the other panelists. The next panelist I'd like to introduce and welcome back to the program, who participated with us last year, is the state's EMS director, and that is Dylan Ferguson. Dylan currently serves as the director of the Bureau of EMS for the Pennsylvania Department of Health. He has 15 years of experience in safety and EMS, with experience as a firefighter, an EMT, a paramedic, and as an EMS administrator. He's credentialed as a paramedic, both here in Pennsylvania and in Illinois, in addition to being nationally certified. He's a graduate of Illinois State University with a bachelor's in political science and a master's degree in emergency and disaster management from American Public University. He has experience working to develop and improve both rural and urban EMS systems, and has a specialization and an interest in utilizing data analytics from operational EMS data from the National EMS Information System, NEMSIS, to study and implement policy related to EMS care and workforce. So Dylan, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. And sir, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Doug. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. It's always a little bit, odd hearing other people talk about you. So with that being said, there's three overarching areas that I'm really going to touch on this morning in the seven or so minutes that I have with you. And they're related to COVID, the EMS workforce, and to talk a little bit about EMS system funding overall. And I'm going to kind of add on to a little bit of Rick's discussion about House Bill 1838. So first off, here at the Department of Health, as most of you can probably imagine, it's been all COVID all the time. And in a lot of instances, I feel like I've been living Groundhog Day over and over and over again. But overall, I really think that EMS as an industry, particularly here in Pennsylvania, has done a really great job in adapting to the situation that we find ourselves in. I know a lot of EMS agencies are, focused on doing the right things to protect their employees, to protect their patients, and ultimately serve their communities. Here within the Bureau, we have implemented a variety of different policies, either with the waiver of certain regulations or statutory suspensions that were authorized by the gubernatorial disaster declaration. And the bulk of those efforts were focused on trying to augment our workforce and to stretch our workforce in the event that the demand would not be able to keep up, the workforce supply would not be able to keep up with the demand. Back in the spring and in the summer, there was very much a concern, really at all levels, and I certainly heard it from the EMS community as a whole, about concerns about being overrun, similar to stories that we were seeing coming out of New York State, of just the EMS system overall being crushed with volume and things of that nature. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what perspective that we view it from, we didn't really have that problem, but rather we had a different problem develop. And that problem was that our transport volumes across the Commonwealth for both 911 and for interfacility transports actually plummeted at the height of the pandemic. Overall, as a state, we saw our transport volume fall about 25% when we were at the height of cases. Some areas of the Commonwealth, in some regions and some agencies, actually saw decreases as high as 50%. Now, for those of you that are in the industry, you certainly don't need to hear this, but for other individuals who may not be affiliated with fire and EMS, is that historically, EMS only gets paid if they transport the patient to the hospital. And yes, we have implemented treat no transport legislation here in the Commonwealth, but that is still a struggle for some services and some insurers, and there continues to be back and forth on that. But ultimately, EMS participates in a fee-for-service model. And if people aren't calling, then EMS isn't generating revenue. And unlike a lot of other industries, and our partners in healthcare and healthcare systems also face this struggle, where they were not able to decrease their expenses. In fact, their expenses increased as a result of pandemic preparations, additional personal protective equipment, extra staff, and things of that nature. Some healthcare systems, including some here in Pennsylvania, but in other states across the country, we did see furloughs of staff. We did see, I wouldn't say to a wide extent, but we did see some instances here within Pennsylvania where EMS services did furlough individual EMTs and paramedics. And certainly we saw that across the country as well. However, with the current surge of cases that we're seeing, and the current climate and context where we are socially, I am not certain that we will be able to avoid a surge in demand for EMS or for healthcare services. We may not be able to mitigate that here in the fall as we were able to in the spring. So ultimately, I think that we've got a lot of leaders of the EMS system that are watching these case numbers go up, but we're watching that hospitalization number, and that plays a direct impact on EMS, because when we start talking hospital capacity, we also start talking about, well, are ambulances going to have to travel further, or are we going to have longer transports in order to get patients to appropriate care? Those are all questions that are unresolved, but those are all things that are on my radar as the director of the Bureau. And ultimately, in kind of transitioning, what I really look for is what challenges is this pandemic going to have on the EMS workforce? EMS workforce is an area that I have studied here in Pennsylvania since I got here about 2.5 years ago. And one thing that myself and state directors across the country, in addition to healthcare systems, are all concerned about is what are the impacts of this pandemic going to be on our workforce, particularly our older workforce. So a little over 10% of the Commonwealth's EMTs and about 12% of the paramedics are over the age of 60. For those of you that are familiar with this, we know that this particular virus impacts those that are older significantly more than those that are younger. And when we take a look at PCR data and actually see who's running calls, we see that about 11% of the active EMTs and paramedics, so right in line with the proportion of those that are licensed, 11% of those are over the age of 60. So, there are concerns whether or not we're going to see significant changes to that workforce when they weigh their own individual risk benefit and whether or not they're going to continue to work in the field. In terms of addressing the workforce overall, though, some good news, but countered with some bad news, is in 2019, Pennsylvania saw a new record high in the number of new certified EMTs within the Commonwealth compared to over the last 7 to 9 years that I had data for. But unfortunately, the trend of young people becoming certified and but then expiring and leaving the profession has also continued. In 2019, about 63% of EMTs who left the profession were under the age of 40, and 41% who left were under the age of 30. And the reasons are plentiful, but a lot of industry survey and research from national organizations and various state organizations show that pay and benefits are one of the primary drivers when it comes to retention. But there are also, and it's always important to be upfront about this, it's important to realize that there's a large number of individuals who they'll take an EMT course or maybe even a paramedic course, and they really never had any intention in working in EMS to begin with. They utilize that EMT training as a means to enter nursing school or to enter PA school. Thus, we really have to come to the realization that we never truly recruited them in the first place. And kind of compounding all of these different factors, there is another stream of individuals that ultimately train here in Pennsylvania, and then they'll transition to a neighboring state, whether it be New York, New Jersey, Maryland. And from the conversations that I have with people, that is largely because that is where EMS salaries are higher. And to be clear, one of the primary reasons for this relates to how the overall EMS system is funded and how that cost of readiness, which is a term you may have already heard throughout the various presentations and you may hear later on today, but that there is really sustained and sufficient funding from a local or a regional level in order to help augment those costs rather than relying solely on a fee-for-service model. When you take a look at trying to diversify revenue streams as a way to shore up the finances of an organization, when the only revenue that's coming in on the balance sheet relates to that fee-for-service, that's particularly challenging for an EMS organization, particularly when Medicare, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has come out and publicly said that they know that they under-reimburse the costs. Anywhere from 6 to 13%, depending on what particular model that you're looking at. And it's already a large issue today, but with more and more individuals retiring each year and more people hitting that Medicare age of 65 every year, this is a problem which is going to continue for the foreseeable future. And then the last section that I'll kind of highlight this morning relates to EMS system funding overall. And for the most are familiar, but ultimately the EMS system, so I'm not referring to individual EMS agencies, but our regional EMS councils, the Pennsylvania Emergency Health Services Council, all of the things behind the scenes that, try to help the system and try to move the system forward and really make the system work, is supported by something called the Emergency Medical Services Operating Fund. As Rick highlighted, Representative Causer's Bill 1838 became law yesterday as Act 93, and that does double the NSOF fines and the ARD for DUI. And this is something that the EMS community overall has been pushing for a fairly long time. The fund had not seen an increase since it was since the last EMS Act of the Act of 1985, and this fund, even before this bill, did allow regional EMS councils to engage in regional projects, to filter money down to EMS agencies by way of pre-hospital provider funds. However, with increasing inflation, decreasing appropriations, and decreasing traffic tickets, things were really starting to get difficult, and regions were having to make very difficult choices. One thing that I do want to highlight, and while the increase in the fines and fees, I believe in the long term will be good for the Pennsylvania EMS system, we're going through a very dicey financial time right now, and that relates to because of the stark decrease in travel at the height of the pandemic and those lingering effects. For this fiscal year alone, revenues are down about a little under 40% compared to fiscal year 18-19. So that led to the department having to make the very difficult choice to make some cuts to the Emergency Medical Services Operating Fund for this year, for the simple fact that there was not enough revenue coming in, and with the revenue losses that the fund took at the very end of last fiscal year. So ultimately, we look forward to implementing 1838. The higher fee amounts will be able to begin to be collected within 120 days, because that was the enabling date of the legislation. So we'll start to see those higher rates collected, if my math is right, sometime in the very early March timeframe. And those are really the three largest aspects from a legal, legislative, and an operational perspective that we're seeing here at the department and within the Bureau of EMS. And Doug, with that, I'll turn it back over to you. I appreciate everybody's attention, and I too look forward to the Q&A later on.
Thank you, Dylan. And no shortage of stuff going on in your world, huh? Okay. Yeah. So thank you. And the next panelist I'd like to introduce is Heather Sharar. Heather is the Executive Director of the Ambulance Association of Pennsylvania. She spent the majority of her professional life working in association management. She's worked for the Pennsylvania Medical Society and other trade associations over the years before coming to the AAP, which she has been with since 2006. Wow. And helped to establish, as well as actively volunteers as the executive for the Pennsylvania EMS Provider Foundation, which raises money to award in the form of grants to EMTs who want to further their EMS career and become paramedics. She is also the coordinator for the Pennsylvania EMS Memorial Bike Ride, which I'm proud to participate in, and the statewide EMS Memorial Service. She served on the board of directors and as an officer for the Pennsylvania Society of Association Excellence, and participates with the annual State EMS Association's networking meetings with her colleagues who run EMS associations from across the country. And I just also want to add that I really can't think of a more effective advocate that EMS has had in Pennsylvania than Heather. She has really helped to spearhead some of the legislative successes that our industry has enjoyed, and our industry has benefited tremendously from her expertise and her drive in spearheading these issues. So we are very happy and very much thank Heather for once again participating in this year's workshop. And ma'am, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. No pressure, but yeah, it's been an interesting year. And first and foremost, I want to thank all the EMS providers for attending, as well as all the legal participants. And I want to thank Widener for again hosting this forum, and Doug for inviting us, and Corinna and Joy and everybody at Widener. This is a wonderful opportunity for us. So just a little bit, I don't want to duplicate what everybody else has talked about. So I want to talk a little bit about the AAP, the Ambulance Association of Pennsylvania. And we are actually a trade association of ambulance services, and we are a 501c3. So we are not a foundation. I'll talk about our foundation in a little bit. So the mission of the association is to be the lead organization for the advancement of the needs of its members in the emergency and non-emergency ambulance and medical transportation industry. Kind of a mouthful, but we advocate and educate for the highest quality patient care through ethical and sound business practices, advancing the interest of our members in important legislative, regulatory, educational, and reimbursement issues. So we have several conferences that we put on, and sometimes they're regional meetings, but we do have an annual reimbursement conference, and it's about compliance and making sure that EMS agencies are compliant with state and federal rules and regulations. So getting back to the mission statement, in accomplishing this goal, the AAP is dedicated to excellence in providing superior service to all facets of its membership, and in developing positive relationships with other organizations associated with the medical transportation industry through prompt communications, effective educational programs, and in carrying out this mission, the AAP is committed to meet the needs of its members in the volunteer, nonprofit, and for-profit sector. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but we are not lobbyists. And like most organizations that are statewide, we are not funded. We have to fund ourselves. So that is through our members. And the members basically dictate what we're going to do, what's important to them, whether it's reimbursement issues, whether it is staffing issues, which Rick and Dylan both talked about. Thank goodness he did. EMS really needs to mobilize to be heard. It's nice to have the statewide organizations be the advocate and the educator, but you are the voter. The individual EMS agencies, staff members, they are the voters, and they need to be heard. So Joy had sent around 2 documents the other day, yesterday, I guess. And the first document that I want to talk about is the Word document that talks about the legislation that has been passed this year and things that were needing to be passed, including House Bill 432 from Steve Brewer, which is the PTSD PTSI Workers' Comp Claim Bill, House Bill 1347, which is Representative Mosser's bill, which is direct pay, which is huge. House Bill 2593, which amends the fiscal code, which would result in $10 million in hazard pay grants. Any COVID relief bills really need to be passed. But as Rick mentioned, we're kind of running out of runway, as he put it. We're running out of time because it's the end of a legislative session. So it's a sine die year, and the legislation that has not been passed will die, more or less. And then in January, we have to start all over again. So House Bill 1673 is now Act 91. House Bill 1838 is now Act 93. And Senate Bill 1281 is now Act 105. So the association actually supported those bills. And the other document that was sent was an Excel document, and the first sheet is the legislation that is related to the SR6 resolution, which other speakers have actually talked about. It is important, and the legislature has kind of used that to kind of move the EMS and fire issues forward. the AAP actually did participate on the SR6 commission, and we have been supporting the legislation that has come out and sending calls to action to members and to non-members when they have actually come up for a vote. At any given time during a legislative year, especially this year, there have been over 200 pieces of legislation that we have been monitoring. And if you notice on some of the documents, there's a lot of EMS issues that have not been addressed. EMS is a heavy issue because it is related most to reimbursement, and we go against the insurance lobby. And I'll get into that a little bit when I want to talk about some of the challenges that we are facing. The second sheet on that Excel document is COVID-related legislation. And we are fighting for the same dollars that many other healthcare professionals and businesses are fighting for. We have all felt the results of the shutdown and limited reimbursements. So we have actually partnered with Pennsylvania Provider Coalition and the Pennsylvania Provider Advocacy Coalition. And they're two not officially formed organizations, but they are other healthcare professionals, including the Hospital Association, the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association, the Medical Society. And we actually worked on some joint efforts. Over 50 organizations came out to support encouragement of the flu shots, and the AAP was actually one of those organizations. So there's opportunities for us to partner with other organizations. We partner with the American Ambulance Association as well. We recently were asked by the American Ambulance Association to send a letter to the White House asking for their support in the federal stimulus relief. We have been working with them on line of duty death benefits. But I wanted to kind of highlight, we actually looked into the top 10 lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and none of those lobbyists were EMS. So EMS is the underdog, if you will. And when you look at a SWOT analysis, you have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and we're going to go with challenges. So we have a lot of strengths when it comes to what we do. And the challenges, we're going to call them opportunities. So this is actually an election year. It's the end of the legislative session, as I mentioned. The legislation dies. We're seeing some retirement of key legislators, especially Steve Farrar. And Steve has been a huge champion for EMS. There are other champions as well, and I don't want to diminish their contributions to EMS, but Steve has been the chair of the House Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee, and he has always, always fought for us. So that means we have the election coming up, as we all hear from every time we turn on the TV or the radio or read anything when it comes across the email. So we have the election of new members, new legislative members. So not only is it the education of incumbent members of the legislature, but it's also essential that we educate the new members. So even if you already have a relationship with your legislator, it's important that you continue that relationship and not just ask them for something. Wishing somebody a happy birthday kind of goes a long way, which is kind of a simple thing, but it is important when you're building a relationship. You have to be genuine. It can't just be, well, I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that. And we do have needs. We have a lot of needs. But you are going up against many other organizations. So building that relationship is key. So if you are not registered to vote, I'm sure everybody is registered to vote, but the greater the number of people saying the same message, the louder the message is heard. Your voice matters. Being a voter matters. So legislation takes time. What seems to be kind of like an easy no-brainer, and I'll use treat no transport because that was such a huge win for us, and we thought that was going to be very cut and dry, and unfortunately it's not. So the solution that we anticipate conflicts with other laws and regulations and other lobbying organizations. And I'm going to use House Bill 1862, which is the prohibition on surprise balance billing, which is a huge issue. I mean, the surprise balance billing is being discussed at the federal level. It's also being discussed at the state level. The Pennsylvania Health Access Network has kind of targeted ambulance services, EMS agencies as the bad guy, and they have held several press conferences. They continue to say that EMS is bad and we have all these bills and we're billing, you know, all these outrageous amounts, and we have to be heard. So we're going up against that, and they're saying that it is a beneficiary, it is a resident, it is, you know, people in a vulnerable state are getting all these huge bills, and they're not looking at it from the other perspective. So we have to give that other perspective. We have discussed House Bill 1862 with the Provider Advocacy Coalition and the Provider Coalition. And I know it's just a word or two, but they are two different organizations. The physicians are supporting amendments from Representative Cawthor and Rothman, which would support a arbitration baseball style type of resolution for them. EMS has taken the position that we want to be exempted from that legislation. And we also have Representative Mosser's House Bill 1347, which would give us direct pay. So not only do we have to be exempted, but the physicians are supporting a different amendment. And so partnering with them, because they are supporting a different amendment, it starts to become very convoluted and very complicated. So when you do develop that relationship with your legislator, it's easier for them to come back to, oh yeah, EMS needs to be exempted. We need to support these other amendments. So that's a little bit about the association and kind of what we've got going on in the works. The Provider Foundation that Doug mentioned, that is a 501c6, which is a charitable organization. So the foundation was founded in 2007 by the Ambulance Association of Pennsylvania, and it was created to serve the Pennsylvania emergency medical services community to ensure public confidence in emergency medical services, to develop the next generation of emergency medical services providers, educate the public of their services, and generally to further the cause of Pennsylvania emergency medical services through education, outreach, and philanthropy. So we have 3 events that take place in September. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we weren't able to hold the Stars of Life event, and we will be holding it in 2021. And Doug Wolfberg is actually our keynote speaker. We do have the Pennsylvania EMS Memorial Bike Ride, and we have the EMS Memorial Service. And those are to raise the awareness of EMS and the struggles, not in partnership with the association. So the EMS Memorial Service is held at the Capitol every year. Dylan has spoken, Rick has attended, Jerry has attended. We had some really great speakers. And this year we actually had a House and Senate resolution designating September 14th as Pennsylvania EMS Memorial, as the Pennsylvania EMS Memorial Day. So that was actually a first, that we had both the House and Senate resolutions. So just a little bit of a plug, contributions are tax deductible if you would like to contribute to the foundation. So I'm going to leave you with a parting thought. You matter, your voice matters. You need to be heard. So please, 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 please develop that relationship with your legislator and get out and vote if you haven't already. Thank you, Doug. I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Appreciate that great overview. And last but certainly not least, I want to introduce Jerry Ozog, who is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute. Jerry has been working in both the volunteer and the career emergency services for the past 35 years. He's an active volunteer firefighter in Hampton Township, formerly served as chief officer and a line officer for 16 years. He's a member of the command and general staff for the South Central Task Force All Hazards Incident Management Team and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Incident Management Team. And as I mentioned, he currently serves as the executive director of the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute, which is a statewide advocacy and education organization. He previously served as an education specialist for a national provider of emergency services insurance, a director for a community college public safety training center, executive director for a regional EMS council, and as a paramedic coordinator for a community hospital. Quite a career. Jerry is also an adjunct instructor in the Integrated Emergency Management Program at FEMA's Emergency Management Institute and National Fire Academy. Jerry himself is a graduate of the prestigious Executive Fire Officer Program at the National Fire Academy and the Master Exercise Practitioner Program at EMI. He is a nationally certified Firefighter 2, Fire Officer 3, Fire Instructor 2, and a Pennsylvania Emergency Medical Technician paramedic. He's earned a bachelor's degree in organizational management and a master's degree in public administration. In 2004, Jerry graduated from Leadership Harrisburg area, which is a community leadership training program. And in 2012, Jerry was awarded the Platinum Award for Servant Leadership from Leadership Harrisburg. So we're very pleased and happy to have Jerry Ozog back with us. And sir, good morning, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Doug, and I appreciate the opportunity. And Heather did a great job along with Rick and the other panelists this morning to explain some of the complexities. And we have a lot to celebrate in regards to the legislative efforts that have occurred over the past 2 years. But what you have to do now is take it and work at the local level to see what's going on and how do you take what we do. So in Pennsylvania, and many of you are involved in the local emergency services, both fire and EMS. We have long established norms in Pennsylvania, and our organizations developed out of community needs. In the late 40s and early 50s, as the suburbs grew, many volunteer fire departments were born. In EMS, moving from the days of the funeral home to the 1970s, and the 1980s was the big thing with EMS when Act 45 started. And the issues that we deal with and how things happened in the past is citizens made it happen. It was a community-driven need where somebody needed an ambulance service in this rural community. So let's get together and do this. Let's put it together. And over the years, as we moved into the 90s, the 2000s, and where we are now, the complexity of running our organizations has increased. However, our legacy organizational structures have remained. And we all have to understand the nature of Pennsylvania. And Heather talked very well about, the dealings with the insurance lobby and things like that. And in some of my discussions and working with them, they basically said, well, why does EMS need to worry about all this kind of stuff, insurance-wise, if the municipalities funded our organizations correctly at the local level? Why would you need to deal with all this stuff? But our legacy systems sometimes are the challenges that we have. And in our systems, many of them are member-driven organizations, and the members have to want to change at the local level. So how do you know you should change at the local level? Okay. Some indicators for change as your service is struggling, as you're facing these financial issues. If you're experiencing community growth, if your community is aging, if you're missing calls and there's extended response times, if you have reduced staffing, these are some of the indicators that you have to understand that you may need to change and do something different or work with other organizations. So here's the tension. When it really comes down to it, in the experience that I've had and the work that I do throughout Pennsylvania, we have all these things that are floating around. We have that tension between this is the way we've always done it, okay? And then there's people that say, I'm not sure we have an issue in our local community. We have independent boroughs and townships. We have independent 501c3 EMS companies and fire companies. We have boroughs and townships complaining that it's going to cost us more money. And then there's fire and emergency services organizations that just say, just give us more money. It'll be fine. There's some people, when you try to add accountability and things like that, they throw up, well, the volunteers will just walk away. So all of this tension is floating out there as we try to determine what the future systems look like in Pennsylvania. So transforming for the future and future trends, what does it look like in what we have seen across Pennsylvania? So number one, cooperation with local government. And I know many organizations have struggled to try to integrate with their local government, but clearly working and attempting to define expectations. Last week, Commissioner Silcox was on this call, and he talked about what his community puts into EMS to ensure that there is one BLS ambulance 24/7, plus another BLS ambulance Monday through Friday. And it was close to $1 million to do that. And understanding that some municipalities feel that is appropriate, many that you deal with do not feel that that is appropriate. And they will do what is necessary to get by on the cheap. And that's not, they're not best for the community and what's not best for the citizens. We have seen regionalization in Pennsylvania. Now, EMS has done it a lot more than, over the years. We're seeing more of that in fire. We're seeing more combination systems in Pennsylvania. And as more organizations accept funding from local government, there is that increased accountability from local government. You're going to have to be accountable for those funds and have more integration at that. So some of the best practices, positive relationships. The clear thing that we talk about and what we have promoted over the past several years is, define that reporting relationship and accountability between local government and the emergency services organization. Is there a clear chain of command on who you deal with? Do you deal directly with the elected officials, or you deal with the township manager? How are those relationships built? And in my world, it is all about relationships and working. And those relationships are not always going to be positive at times. There's struggles at those times. But one of the keys to success is communicating on a regular basis, attending meetings and providing written communications. And, a lot of times I deal with people and they show me what their written communication is. It's something this thick with statistics and data. Elected officials want one page, okay? Get to the point, a couple of bullet points, one or two graphs, get to the point and talk about what that is. The other thing that we've been focusing on is that joint planning process, that strategic planning process, bringing those community people together in with the emergency services organization, bring the township supervisors in the borough, offer to do a joint strategic planning process. And then kind of through that process, define some of what your performance measures, community performance measures are. Because a lot of times, people clearly do not understand how long it takes to get an ambulance to the scene and what that cost of readiness is to get that ambulance to the scene. And putting people together around the table, a community-based strategic planning program is extremely important, where you're building those relationships. So it can happen. There are great examples of current organizations across Pennsylvania that have adapted and changed to meet the needs of Pennsylvania. This was spoken about last week in our session, and I firmly believe it. I loved it so much, I wrote it down here. Transparency builds trust. Trust builds relationships. It takes courage at all levels, and it starts with a conversation. Steve did a great presentation on this also about this negativity. And we just hear so much of negativity and bad things. And you got to remain positive, and it starts with a conversation. So with that, I think it's time I will stop sharing and time for Doug to take it back and we could ask questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Jerry, for that very thought-provoking presentation. So we have about 6 minutes left here, folks. If we run a minute or two over, it will not be the end of the world. But I would like to remind our participants that they can ask questions by writing those into the Zoom chat feature. I will monitor those throughout. And again, if you would like a question directed to a particular panelist, please just let me know that. The first question I would like to direct to Director Ferguson, and that is to ask what of the changes and modifications that we're seeing in the system now as a result of COVID, in your view, have a chance of surviving and lasting beyond the public health emergency or the pandemic? Do you see the pandemic, in other words, as laying groundwork for any changes that might be made permanently, or at least for the foreseeable future, in the EMS system?
So a couple of different things. One of the, and it wasn't so much as an exception as it was more of a clarification and making sure that everyone knew that this was permitted. It relates to transport to alternate destinations. And I really think that telemedicine and alternate destinations and getting the patient to the right level of care and the right care in the right place at the right time, I think that's going to be something that we're going to see as part of a larger industry trend, kind of aligning with ET3 and things of that nature. The other thing that we could potentially see and would require legislation, and the department truly doesn't have a position on this. This would largely have to be driven by the individual providers themselves. But as part of what was done with multiple healthcare licenses related to the allowance for out-of-state EMS agencies to come in and operate, in addition for out-of-state EMS providers to be able to come in and operate on the sole basis of their credential from their other state. And there is actually an interstate compact called Replica that multiple states have signed on to. Pennsylvania has not. And as I said, this would largely have to be driven by the provider community themselves. But those are, I think those are two of the things that, kind of bubble up to the top as being the potential for, the longest lasting and most influential change.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the plug for Replica. I happen to serve as general counsel for Replica. We're up to 21 states. And that is, as you referenced, an interstate compact that allows for multi-state practice for EMTs and paramedics under certain conditions. That law has been effective at the outset of the pandemic here for helping states with staffing issues and to facilitate interstate practice among the states that have adopted that. So we'd certainly, I know the department doesn't have a position on that, but I would certainly like to see Pennsylvania ramp up its legislative efforts to join that particular interstate compact. So not to put you on the spot, Rick O'Leary, but if you can't speak to the EMS interstate compact generally, perhaps you can talk about whether or not your committee has been involved in other interstate compacts or has addressed any other issues like that, and if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, sure, Doug. We did do the Interstate Emergency Compact, probably 18, 20 years ago.
Now you're talking about EMAC there, I believe,
that's
right?
The EMAC, but that set the stage for that it can be done. The tools that we can work with other states and reciprocity here and there. At the time we did that, it was, it was a little bit of heresy, but you can see now it's something we need and it works well, But yeah, we're working on some reciprocity licensure issues. We're doing one now with for veterans and military that move around. We want to have reciprocity for certain. The latest one we did was physical therapists. But that's something for EMS. Yeah, I mean, because we know some of the border states up in New York, some of those units they rely on the people across the border. What Pennsylvania is very much a border state. I mean, all around us. We're shared services. So that's something we definitely would be interested in working on.
Excellent. Thank you. And Heather, has the Ambulance Association of Pennsylvania taken a position on Replica yet?
We really haven't taken an official position. I know that it is supported, and we actually did have several meetings with the Pennsylvania Emergency Health Services Council and the Department of Health, probably was before Dylan came on board. So I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago. So for us, it is a question of political capital. Of course, we've been trying to get some other things. And of course, this year, COVID kind of threw a monkey into everything. So, the priorities changed, but I think that the board would probably support it. I'm not speaking for them. It hasn't come up, but I don't know that it's something that will bubble to the top. It depends on what our members want, of course, because they set the legislative priorities. But, long story short, I think that they would support it.
Sure, right. And we will definitely not hold you or the organization to any representations
Right.
made here today.
Right.
Jerry, I'd like to throw one to you here. And that is a question about And it's about 10 o'clock, so I don't want to go too far over, but I would like to hear your take, if you can encapsulate that as briefly as you can, on the countywide municipal authority concept that has been discussed within the legislature and has come up a couple of weeks here in this program. Any quick thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Doug. And there was a lot of work put together in several roundtable discussions on the Senate side, and there was a lot of positivity and a lot of energy behind that. Obviously, that will have to be reintroduced. That is one of those things, to be honest with you, that is kind of groundbreaking in Pennsylvania. There are about 7 current EMS municipal authority models in Pennsylvania. And they're working. The people that run those authorities have some suggestions in improvement of that. But again, what the challenge will be is developing those will require an extraordinary amount of cooperation between municipalities, emergency services organizations, and the community in general. Okay, and this is something that is a long-term trust building effort that everybody recognizes the problem, and we've been talking about the problem for many years. Here is a legislative tool that could be used, but passing a law in Harrisburg allowing it to happen will not fix a local problem unless the local people are willing to have that extraordinary amount of cooperation. Now, that cooperation can be built by having a community-based strategic plan with people at the table that understand why we're here, and that is to ultimately provide an excellent service to the community.
Well, thank you. And it's interesting that you started your remarks by saying that that's fairly groundbreaking in Pennsylvania, but it's the model in many other states. So it's interesting in that regard. But of course, one size never fits all, and we are a Commonwealth, and we do have our areas where we are unique. But I appreciate your thoughts on those. On that issue. One last issue that has been asked by one of our attendees, and I know, again, we're a couple of minutes over here, please bear with us, and that is, it's a very broad question. We could do a whole seminar just on this question, but I'm going to ask Dylan Ferguson to respond and have the last word on this, and that is, we have to be concerned about long-term sustainability of EMS as an industry. And it seems like everything going on right now is reactionary to issues and short-term solutions. In other words, we're stomping on brush fires. I wonder, Dylan, if you could just share some thoughts. Again, that could be another hour, but if you could just share some brief thoughts on that question about long-term sustainability versus short-term crises, and share a few thoughts on that before we wrap up.
Well, sure. A couple of different things. You're absolutely right in terms of having to respond in the here and now and being very reactionary. However, I think that there are a couple of things that have already kind of started to percolate that are going to kind of redefine what EMS is going to look like, not only here in Pennsylvania, but really across the country. And I think that there was already a realization with here in PA with the treat no transport legislation, with coming to the realization that the right tool for every patient is not a hospital emergency department. So while that was trying to address a short-term issue in terms of finance, it certainly has downstream implications. The other aspect of, and while this is a federal program, it's certainly going to have an impact, and that's going to be ET3. Once again, kind of following that same concept and really looking to introduce telemedicine, the telemedicine component to emergency medical services. Now, some areas, even here in Pennsylvania, have been doing telemedicine and doing online medical command consults, for several years. And I really think that it's going to be those types of, while they may be seeming to solve a short-term problem, they are certainly going to have downstream implications. The other aspect that I really think, which is going to kind of drive the bus forward from a long-term perspective, is this realization that EMS isn't just 911, I pick you up, I take you to the hospital, I'm done, I write a chart, and then I bill Medicare. You know, we're going to see additional growth, whether it relates to community paramedicine or mobile integrated health or whatever that we want to call it this particular week. Now, this is something that when it comes to EMS and when it comes to any industry which is rapidly evolving, is that sometimes the law cannot necessarily keep up with the nimbleness of an agent, with the nimbleness of an industry. Fortunately, here in Pennsylvania, we have a lot more flexibility than what a lot of other states do. However, there are still certain aspects, particularly when it comes back to fundamentally what is EMS. And that's one area where I think that our industry has just moved faster than what the law does. And I really think that, you know, that's not unique to EMS. That I think all the lawyers in the room can certainly agree that sometimes, whether it be technology, whether it be industry practice, sometimes outpaces what's written in black and white. And I think, Doug, I think that's the closing thought I'll leave you on that point.
Well, and those are great closing thoughts. And I thank you once again, Dylan. So again, I would like to thank all of the panelists that we've had over the course of this 3-week program. Senators Regan and Iovino, Representative Barrar, Nate Silcox, Barry Albertson, Dave Sanko, Heather Sharar, Dylan Ferguson, Rick O'Leary, Jerry Ozog, Steve Wirth. I hope I didn't forget anybody, but everyone has made really an outstanding contribution to this year's program. We appreciate everybody's flexibility in helping us run this program virtually. There was a lot of important things going on in the industry this year, legislatively, legally, and we really wanted to get that information out. So we appreciate everybody participating in this year's virtual format. I want to again specifically thank Corinna Wilson for putting together the program once again, for Widener Law Commonwealth for its sponsorship and support of this and other programming for emergency services, first responders, and veterans, and all of you for attending, for your great questions throughout the program, and for everything that you do and are doing in your communities for the citizens of our Commonwealth. All of us owe you a debt of gratitude, and we thank you very much. So with that, this concludes the 2020 Emergency Medical Services and the Law, CLE program. We thank you for your participation, and we hope to see you next year.